Okay, cool. It looks like I'm live. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a lovely Tuesday, or it might be Monday, wherever you are on the planet. Hope you're all doing good. My name is Dylan. This is Existential Delight. This is just a casual stream I wanted to do because I haven't spoken to you guys in a while, and I've gotten some cool upgrades for the channel thanks to the generosity of viewers. Actually, somebody emailed me and made a donation to the channel and asked me to reinvest that into the channel, so that was really wonderful and really kind. So I've actually in the process now of upgrading my computer, and I got some better lighting, so hopefully the lighting looks a little bit better than it used to. And I also got kind of, I'm still debating if I'm gonna get more, but I quite like that little light in the background. I saw that on takealot.com, which is kind of like South Africa's, probably like South Africa's Amazon, although on a much smaller scale. And I thought it was quite cool, so I got one just to try and spruce up the spruce up the setting a little bit. So I actually just had a full day at work, and I just got home and I quickly set up everything, and I was thinking about the stream pretty much from yesterday, from when I started planning it and thinking about what I would talk about. And it's not necessarily that I even need to answer questions in the live chat. It's really more that I'm just going to be answering questions that I get in the comment section. So in many of the videos I've released on YouTube, in the comment sections there are several different questions I get relating to whatever the content is, and I try and answer those questions as much as I can, but between you and me, I just don't get to all the questions. So I thought I would answer a few of the common questions I get in a little bit more detail and a little bit more directly. Of course, there's only you can only go so far when you're typing an answer, right? So let me go through this with you guys by just giving you a brief overview of what you can expect. So I'm going to be answering a few questions. First of all, I'm just going to be answering a big question I got, which is, what do I think of the Theotokos, or the Blessed Virgin Mary? As a convert to Catholicism, Christianity more generally, what is my relationship like, so to speak, with the Blessed Mother? And I'm going to be unpacking that, and that's why the thumbnail for this stream is actually an image of Mother Mary. Then I'm going to discuss another question I get a lot, which is the kind of spiritual versus religious question. Why be religious when you could just be spiritual? I'll then talk about a question I get kind of more frequently than I would expect, which is, what are you currently reading? Obviously, when I answer this question now in this live stream, by the time by the time the stream ends, or by the time you watch it, I might not be reading this anymore, but I'll go into that. And then another question is, why not just follow Jesus? Why be involved in a church at all? I'll just give my perspective on that. And then I'll talk a little bit about a newsletter that I'm going to be releasing. I'll also answer the question, a few people have asked me if I speak Afrikaans, which is a local language here in South Africa, so I'll answer that question. And then I'll also just end the stream off with some upcoming work and just give you guys an update on what's happening with the channel. So I'm kind of limited for time today. I'm going to be going till about, for about 45 minutes, and then I'll end it off. I don't think I even need that much time to get through everything here, but I do talk for a living in my day job, and when you speak for a living, having a big mouth is an occupational hazard. So it's possible that I might end up speaking more than I should. So let me get started with that first question that, I think anybody who watches this video in the future, I think my thinking will evolve on this question, but for now, this is where I am. And the question is just, what is my view of the Theotokos? What is my view of Mother Mary as a convert? And I think there's a few things here I can say that you might find interesting. First of all, I do want to point out that we often talk about conversion as just being a change of the heart, which is true because the heart's a very all-encompassing term, right? When somebody says, my heart is telling me to do this, I don't think they literally just mean the organ that's located behind this thin layer of skin, within the center of their chest. I think we mean much more by that term heart. It's a kind of broad term that captures our whole emotional, our whole passion, all of our passions, all of our emotions, kind of pushing us into a specific direction. I think that's generally what we mean by heart. I think it's a very big term. And what I want to say here is that conversion is a change of heart, it's a change of desire. It's not just a change of it's not that you just want it's not just that you are pursuing different things, but that you want to pursue different things. And it's also a change of perspective. I think when you adopt a new worldview or you adopt a new philosophy, not that Christianity is a philosophy, you can't reduce it to that, but when you adopt a new way of looking at the world, you are really adopting a new perspective. And so I have had a change of perspective in the way I see Mother Mary, in the way I see the Blessed Virgin. So a very important point to start us off. Now, for some converts, they kind of find the church, and then Mother Mary's kind of put on the back burner, right, as they learn more about the church, and they know that they're going to have to get to her at some point, but they're more interested in just learning about the church initially. For me, it was kind of mutual. As I learned about the church, I learned about Mother Mary. It wasn't that one really came before the other. It was a kind of mutual discovery. And I should say that as a Protestant, or I should more correctly say, coming from my Protestant youth and then finding Mother Mary in Catholicism, I think my initial kind of view of her was that she was just an ordinary woman chosen by God to give birth to the Messiah. Now, when I say that, it sounds so kind of crazy, because there's nothing ordinary about being the person that God chooses to give birth to the Messiah. Just saying it makes you realize that, it made me realize that the idea that she's just an average random person, I think already kind of, it makes it difficult, because by her place in history, it's difficult for me just to dismiss her as a nobody. Okay, so that is one way my thinking has changed on this topic. Also, the incarnation is really strange. The idea that God became man is a really beautiful and really strange idea. And so the idea that God would enter this world and take on human flesh, the second person of the Trinity would do that. Well, he entered the world through across a bridge, and that bridge was a human being. And that human being, that bridge that Christ used to enter the world, surely that bridge is important. And again, there we find Mother Mary. And so at kind of one of the central elements of the mystery of the incarnation is the Blessed Mother, is Mother Mary. She's right there, right? You can't really talk about the incarnation without her coming up, is the way I see it. So that's another point. And then, you and I, we're children of God. And that's a weird thing. If you stop and think about that and try and wrap your head around that idea that we are children of God, that's already quite odd and quite strange and quite beautiful. But now try and consider it from Mary's perspective. You're not just a child of God, you're actually part of the birthing process of God. You're actually the mother of God. It's like you and I are children of God, but what is she? She's completely in a category of her own, in a way. Okay, so if you just joined the stream, I'm just kind of unpacking some thoughts about Mother Mary, right? Because this is a question I get a lot. What is your view of Mother Mary? So I'm not like really trying to make any statements here. I'm just kind of fleshing out my thinking for you and the way I view this. Okay, then it's important to realize that Mary, and by the way, guys, I've got some notes here just so I don't ramble too much. I'm just checking the notes every now and then. So just so you know, if I'm looking down. Now, Mary wasn't just present at the Annunciation and at the crucifixion, right? There's a whole life. There's a whole life in between the moment when she gets told she's going to give birth to the Messiah and Christ on the cross. There's a whole life there. And, you know, as a Catholic, when I'm praying the rosary and I'm going from mystery to mystery, it's important to realize that there are hundreds of thousands of events that took place between, or I should say hundreds of thousands of moments that took place between these events, these mysteries, as we go through the prayer. And so for Mother Mary, being a mother doesn't end when the child is born. It deepens. It takes on, you become a mother of a living child, and you're... oh gosh, people are going to crucify me for saying that. But you become your relationship to your child deepens because now your child is an actual person walking around, and you can actually get to know them and see their face and hear their voice and all the other things, right? So there's a deepening of motherhood that happens when Christ is actually born. And so I think you don't want to view Mother Mary as just this kind of vessel that just gave birth to Christ and then is unimportant, right? Her place within the story is very significant, and the relationship she has with Christ is just as significant as, or maybe I shouldn't say just as significant, but is as significant as the relationship that any mother has with their child. In fact, this one is even elevated because she is not just the mother of a child, but she's the mother of the child of God. So it elevates everything to a higher level. Now, logic and reason lead me to the conclusion that Mary is the first Christian. This is also another interesting idea that I quite like. You know, I've got a book on the shelf behind me called The First Muslim by a lady, I think her name is Leslie Hamilton, where she talks about Muhammad and his history and where he comes from. I bought that book a few years ago, and when I read the title, recently, I actually thought, who was the first Christian? And, well, who was the first person to really encounter Christ? Well, of course, his own mother. Who was the first person to submit her will to God's will in relationship to Christ? I'm going to say something that's going to sound like word salad, but who was the first person to submit their will to God, to God, so that she might, through her relationship with God, build a relationship with Jesus, with Christ? It sounds a bit all over the place, but I believe it makes sense if you follow the steps. Well, that was Mary. She was the first Christian. She set the example for all of us. So again, an important place in the corpus of Christian thought. Now, it's here that I should point out, and this is a very important point, that while I do everything I've just said, which obviously shows you that I have a sort of a very special place for the role that she played, which has developed over time, I should say that she's not on the same level as God. That it'd be like, it's like if I go with you to a beautiful mountain range and we look at this stunning mountain range and I said, wow, that's so beautiful, that's so gorgeous, that mountain range is just absolutely stunning. And you looked at me and say, hey, hold on, mister. Just remember, God gets all the glory. Don't you appreciate this mountain range? I kind of see it like that as a convert. I'm not taking away from God by talking about something beautiful that he made or something beautiful in his plan for salvation. I'm elevating God. I'm elevating his plan for salvation by admiring something beautiful that he's created. So let me give you an example that I wrote down while I was thinking about this, which is, I can give praises and admiration to Van Gogh for his painting of the Starry Night, but Van Gogh is never going to equal, Van Gogh the person, he's never going to equal the splendor of the night sky that he painted. Mary's never going to equal the splendor of her creator. She's a creature in the sense of being created like you and I. She's a creature, but we just I just kind of see her as in a very kind of special place, not to take anything away from God, not to worship her like that. And this brings me on to another point. The idea that Catholics worship Mary. I mean, I've seen videos of Catholics in like Guatemala or even here in parts of Africa where it looks like people are worshiping her, and maybe that does happen, right? But the exception kind of proves the rule, which is you've got to realize you don't really know what's going on in someone's mind when they give homage to something, when they appreciate something, when they admire something. You don't really know what their relationship to it is. And maybe some people are going too far and worshipping, but I would say that they're in contradiction to the church. I don't think that they're affirming what the church teaches. Of course, you shouldn't be giving equal worship to the Theotokos as you would to God, but this is, I mean, to me an old and tired argument. I don't even think it deserves, I'm just elaborating my thought because that's the point of this video, but there's enough online already to clarify this point, and this point has been clarified honestly to death. So let me just mention a few things here, which is that converts who maybe came from Protestantism are extremely, extremely unlikely to convert to something where they actually have to worship a person like Mary. So think about it. You've got a person who's the most unlikely to want to worship Mary. Why would that person then convert into a religion that worships Mary? Surely that convert has realized that Catholicism doesn't worship Mary and is okay with converting because he understands the role that Mary plays within the faith. Surely that's more likely than the idea that actually there's, we do worship her. What's more likely to me is that perhaps your understanding of Catholic belief is just slightly mistaken. And I could broaden that to even Eastern Orthodox belief. If you think we worship her, well, what's more likely, that you're mistaken in your perception and your understanding, which is maybe not your fault. Maybe you were taught that way and you were raised that way and you never delved deeper. But maybe that's the case, and not the case that a convert who is extremely unlikely and already trepidatious of the idea that Catholics worship Mary would then just drop that apprehension and accept this crazy teaching that Mary is equal to God. Like that's not what's happening. Perhaps the more likely scenario is actually what's going on, and that's that maybe your understanding of Catholic belief is just slightly mistaken. And maybe you need to look into it and look a little bit deeper and maybe research and look at how the early church, how the early Christians viewed Mary. This is, by the way, what I was thinking when I was going through my conversion process, when I was researching the church and researching Christianity in general. I really had to wrestle with that. Perhaps I'm just mistaken. Maybe the reason every Catholic tells me, "Oh, we don't worship Mary," is because they don't. So just something to think about. So I think this accusation is a silly one, and I think it's often the accusation reveals more ignorance on the part of the attacker than it reveals idolatry on the part of the worshipper. So something to think about. Now, ultimately, as are all things within Christianity, beautifully, Mary being the mother of God is a mystery. It's a paradox. It's a strange consideration that makes Christianity even stranger and more beautiful. None of us are permitted to choose our mother except Christ. And not only did he choose her, he created her. And I think it's useful to reflect on that fact. Mary's position is not only odd, but it's unique. And to dismiss her as a mere woman chosen happenstance, I think, is to diminish her clear role in God's plan for salvation. And I'll end this point off by saying that God didn't choose Mary because she was somehow above us and elevated. I think that she was elevated because God chose her and God knew the role she was to play. So I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to do apologetics here. I'm just walking you through my thinking on this topic, because I've had a lot of questions, especially since I released my conversion video, about my view of Mary, and I just needed to elaborate on a few of those points with you guys over here. Now, before I go on to the next question, let me just have a quick look at the chat. Keenan, you absolute awesome person. Thank you for being here. Guys, if you don't know Keenan, he's a musician. He makes music, Keenan Beats. Please share your link in the chat, Keenan, so that people can find your amazing music. Keenan and I have known each other for a while. I actually kind of challenged him I think it was a few years ago. Keenan will correct me in the chat, but a few years ago, he kind of posted something on Instagram, and I think he said something like, all of us are idiots, or something like that. And I messaged him and I said, yeah, all of us are sinners. And that got him kind of thinking about Christianity. And if I'm not mistaken, Keenan is now an Eastern Orthodox Christian. So God bless you, Keenan. Thanks for being here. And then Quasi Homestead says, hey Keenan, I love your beats. That's nice of you to say. Quasi Homestead. Blue Man says, greetings from the Philippines. Greetings, Blue Man. Thank you for your kind words. Keenan says, the love between the Theotokos and Christ is almost too intense to try and understand. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. And I don't think we can understand it. I think it's a mystery. And in a large part, being a Christian is being okay with mystery, is not only being okay with it, but loving it. And that's okay. Hey, Mateo, welcome to this chat. Thanks for being here. Keenan says, right, even the first reformers venerated Mary. Yeah, very interesting. Guys, I'm really trying not to just repeat all of the kind of online talking points. Hopefully I gave you some kind of different perspective, at least something that's at least my perspective, for what it's worth. Okay, good. So one last question in the chat, or one last point in the chat, then we're going to move on. Father John Brown says, can't stick around for long, but glad I catch a few seconds live. Christ peace. Thanks, Father. Thank you so much for being here. And Keenan's just shared his music link, guys, so be sure to check out Keenan's music. It's really good. I'm not just saying that because we're friends. I really enjoy his stuff. Okay, good. Then another question I get a lot is, why be religious when you can just be spiritual? I'm going to keep this one short, guys, and just say that I'm religious because I'm spiritual, and I'm spiritual because I'm religious. Humans are not just soul with a body, and we're not just body with a soul. We're body-soul composites. That is at least my view of the world. That's the Catholic view of the world, and I think it's true. And we are a combination of body and soul. And so religion kind of gets the body up out of bed and into church on a Sunday morning, and that enlivens the soul, and that brings gratitude to the soul, and that develops and deepens your spiritual life. I've had people say to me, I'm spiritual but not religious. And I say, well, the deeper I am in my religion, the more I practice my religion, I find that my spirituality deepens. I actually think people want to be spiritual, but they don't want to be religious. But I think that's because they have a very negative view of what religion is, and I don't think that's always their fault. I think maybe it's their experiences of religion growing up. And I'm sure for some of you growing up, you had very negative experiences with religion, and maybe that pushed you away from the faith. So we got to give some charity to people who say that. I don't want to just assume, oh, this guy is completely against Christianity. Maybe he's just against the terrible experiences he had growing up, which were actually the opposite of true, a true experience with Christ. And we want to give them some charity, right? And try and walk with them. But my approach is always to kind of shock people. So, you want to almost double down on the strangeness and the weirdness and the oddity and the perplexity of Christianity. And when somebody says something like, well, I'm spiritual, not religious, you actually want to shock them and say, well, I'm spiritual because I'm religious. I'm religious precisely because it deepens my spirituality. And the great thing about those kinds of points is that they open up conversation. You can now have a conversation with this other person and you can really get them going down corridors of their mind that they have since, up to that point not considered even knocking on the door of. So at that point you can walk with people into maybe an interesting conclusion. Good. Then another question is, what are you currently reading? So I'm actually right now on a fiction binge. I don't know about you guys, but when I was younger, I never read nonfiction. I only read fiction. I thought nonfiction was boring. Then I don't know what happened in my high school years. I had a complete flip and I only read nonfiction. And I started reading history and philosophy and theology and all the rest. And I kind of saw fiction sometimes as a waste of time. To be honest with you, I don't want to like try and sugarcoat it. I'm happy to say wrong. Fiction is very valuable and it can give you an insight into other people's lives depending on the fiction you're reading, right? So I don't want to use the classic example of Dostoevsky, so I won't. But I'll use maybe another example, which is what I'm currently reading, which is Terry Pratchett. So I've just discovered the wonderful world of Discworld by Terry Pratchett, and I'm reading the first Discworld book, which is The Color of Magic. Now, any hardcore Discworld fan will probably tell you that this isn't the best book to start with, but this was gifted to me by somebody a few years ago. I used to work in a bookstore, and one of the guys who worked with me gifted me this, right? Beautiful gift. And I hadn't read it for all these years, and I decided to read it, and I was amazed. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's such a bizarre world. You might know about it, you might not, but let me just give you a brief idea, a beautiful thought. The world of Discworld, you have this giant flying turtle in outer space called Atuin, and on Atuin's shell are 4 gigantic elephants, and upon the 4 gigantic elephants is a disc, like a flat earth, and that's where everything happens. And there's, I think, over 50 or over 40 novels in the series, and each novel is different, but they all take place in the same world. And Terry Pratchett, the author, said something like, the people on Discworld don't talk about the fact that they're on a giant floating turtle because they're on it. They just don't experience it day to day. And then he says, just like in the same way, we don't talk about the fact that we're on a giant spinning ball and at the center there's a molten core, and that's quite strange and we just don't talk about it, right? It's quite weird. Now, as I say that, I realize there might be some of you here who don't think we are on a giant spinning ball. You might not be a heliocentrist? You might be a... what's the term? Man, I can't believe I forgot. Well, you might be a geocentrist. That's the word, right? But that's maybe for another stream. But anyway, this is great. You should really check this out. I actually was at a secondhand bookstore and I found a few more, so I'm going to read these next because I'm really loving the style, the writing. Very, very interesting. In one of his books, I think it's The Hogfather, the Grim Reaper or Death says, if you take the whole universe and you grind it down to the finest powder you can grind it to, and you take that fine powder of the universe and you sieve it through the finest sieve you can find, you will not find in those particles of dust a single molecule that contains love or justice or mercy or truth. These are all things that come from beyond the physical world. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I'm really loving Discworld at the moment. So that answers that question. What am I currently reading? Terry Pratchett. Then, back to a religious question. Why not just follow Jesus? Good question. I think the answer is pretty simple, to be honest with you. Jesus established a church. So, to follow Jesus, I have to be in communion with the church he established. Now, there's a tremendous amount of debate about which church that is. I believe it's the Catholic Church. You might believe something else. That's okay. We don't have to agree on that point. Not right now on a live stream anyway. But the point stands nonetheless, right? If Christ established a church, then am I really following Christ if I don't engage in a church? I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but it seems pretty basic to me. Also, the church isn't a building. It's not an organization. It's more like an organism. It's more like a body. It is. It is the body of Christ. So to reject the church is, in a way, in my mind, to reject Christ. To me, following Christ and being part of a church are the same thing. So that's how I would answer that question. Guys, by the way, feel free to ask questions. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. Mateo says, I agree that Catholics... Okay, this is going back to an earlier question. Sorry, I missed it, Mateo. Mateo said, agree that Catholics don't worship many, but a lot do. It's ignorant thing. It's an ignorant thing to do, but some do it. Yeah, it's true. Some people do. I don't think it's helping Catholics to say, there's not a single Catholic on the planet that doesn't worship Mary. I think people do, but I think they're mistaken, and I think they're in contradiction to the teachings of the church. The churchings of the teach. Anyway, another question for you guys. Who is my favorite non-religious YouTuber? I'm actually curious. If you're listening right now, I'd want to know what you think. Who's someone that you watch on YouTube who's not religious, who doesn't make religious content? Let's put it that way. They don't make religious content, but you really enjoy the content they make. Let me know in the chat if you so dare. Let me know in the chat. Who's somebody that's not religious, but you enjoy their content? I'll tell you guys right now that for me it goes in stages. For a month or two I might be really into a specific channel, and then that might evolve and I might get into a different channel. Right now, Chris Williamson from Modern Wisdom, I'm really enjoying that channel. I'm working in the corporate world. I really like content about productivity, improving, looking for systems that I can use to help myself work in more informed ways. So Ali Abdaal, Chris Williamson, I've really been on a binge of those two guys for probably the last 2 weeks. That's the content I've really been enjoying on YouTube. There are, of course, the general creators who I'm kind of always checking out. It might be like Pints with Aquinas. I tend to enjoy. I do watch Joe Rogan clips quite often. I'll be honest with you. A few other things, but probably right now I would say Modern Wisdom, Chris Williamson. I'm really enjoying that content. It's really helped me wake up earlier, exercise, focus on my fitness, eat healthier, know what to take to help my body in terms of, if I'm working indoors all day, some vitamin D might be helpful, working on more, looking at my fitness, looking at the health of my body, being flexible as I'm entering my 30s, utilizing my fitness in the way I can. And so currently lifting a lot of kettlebells, eating a lot better than I used to. Oh my goodness, if you guys could see me 5 years ago, I was, I don't know what the metric is if you had to equate it to pounds, but I was close to 115 kilograms at one point. So I've lost a lot of weight, but I'm quite tall. I'm 183 centimeters. I think that's about 6 foot. So I typically weigh a lot more. But anyway, I'm digressing. So I asked you guys a question. What's some non-religious YouTubers you enjoy? Keenan says Social Animal and Cartnarks. I actually don't know either of those guys, Keenan. I'll have to check them out. And Blue Man says the political content YouTuber Infrared. In terms of political, I quite enjoy the Distributist. I quite enjoy his content. Keenan sends a super chat. Thank you so much, Keenan. Keenan says, what are your thoughts on a lot of Protestants saying that the church is a sort of invisible congregation of various believers? I'll read it one more time just so I make sure I understand it right. Keenan says, what are your thoughts on a lot of Protestants saying that the church is a sort of invisible congregation of various believers? Okay, so I could approach this in a few different ways, Keenan. So I'm sure that there's a solid, sound, theological, biblical argument that could be made, and I'm sure somebody's made it before, but I don't know it off the top of my head. I have heard this question before, and I have thought about it. Well, I would kind of start off by saying, like, if a Protestant friend said this to me, I think I'd first of all just ask them, what do you mean by invisible? Because we live, again, we're body, soul, composites. So we live in bodies, we congregate in communities of people. And so the idea that there's this kind of, invisible unity, maybe I would say that the church extends outwards, and that we're in an invisible sense, like somebody might see me do some work of charity and might feel moved by that, and might in some way feel that they want to speak to me and learn about my mindset, and that might lead them to the church, and maybe in an invisible way, if I'm using that term, that might lead them to Christ, right? But I think the question makes a few assumptions. So the church is a sort of invisible congregation of various believers. I don't know what they would mean by invisible, because I personally don't think the church, and it isn't just a building, it's people, and it's the relationship that exists between people. But the question, I think, comes down to, what is the thing that unites those people? Well, it's their belief in Christ. And so, okay, so then maybe that means that the church is actually just this belief, which is the unity of Christ. But I think it's deeper than that. It's also, I think, partaking in the sacraments. So baptism is obviously an element of that. Confirmation, I would say, is an element of that. And to a Protestant, I would say, you've got some of it, but come here. There's so much more. There's so much more that you could experience. We've got the full menu, right? You're eating like off the starters menu. Like, come to the full menu. Man, I actually don't know how to answer that question. What are your thoughts on a lot of Protestants saying that the church is a sort of invisible congregation of various believers? I don't have a one-sentence answer for that. I would say that the church is something that was established, and that the church has a clear head, and the Eastern Orthodox might disagree with me. You might disagree with me on this, Keenan, but I do believe that Christ gave authority to St. Peter, and that authority has passed down through the generations, and that even if you maybe don't recognize the authority of the Bishop of Rome, maybe you do. Hopefully you do recognize the authority of the apostles and the successors of the apostles, and that is a very real historical fact, and that to me already exceeds beyond the basic idea of an invisible unity of believers, because we have a very clear historical structure and a very clear historical set of councils of actual people meeting and discussing theology, ideas, teachings, what it means that the second person of the Trinity entered the world and rose from the dead. So I think that's where I would go. So I started off answering the question by not knowing the answer, and I'm kind of coming to an answer now thinking out loud. I think, to answer your question finally, Keenan, because it's a really great question, I think I would get to the point where I would just say, look, you think it's an invisible body? Well, let's consider what Christ did, and we have to look at the scriptures where Christ established the church, where Christ gives authority to the apostles. I think I would ask that Protestant, not just to kind of like shoot him down, but to really know what he thinks. What do you do with the authority of the apostles? Did that die with them, or did they pass it on? And what do you do with church history? What do you do with all the councils? What do you do with the council what do you do with the church where the books are actually, where the canon of scripture is actually determined? What do you do with that? Is that just, if I reject that, am I still part of this invisible body? I think there are structures in place, and I think, thank God, and I don't mean that, I mean that sincerely, thank the Lord that those structures are in place, because they give us clear direction about the boundaries of the church. And there are obviously clear boundaries about what it means to be outside of the church, right? If I say that Christ didn't rise from the dead, or Christ wasn't the Messiah, then I'm, am I eliminated from that invisible boundary? I would say yes, but I already at that point, is that really invisible anymore? Because we have clear structures about the lines of boundary. As somebody who who comes from a New Age background where I was all about dissolving boundaries. I'm now very grateful for boundaries, and I would say that Protestant view is almost dissolving boundaries, and I'm saying, no, actually, we need the boundaries, and I think Christ established some boundaries. So I hope that answers your question, but I will continue to think about that point. Great question. Thank you, Keenan, for asking that. Good. Tommy Gunn says, when will the South African community be doing something in person? Well, I don't know how big the SA community is, Tommy Gunn. What do you mean by community? Do you mean like a Catholic community, or do you mean just kind of people on this channel? Because we could definitely do something. I could put something together. Let me know what you mean, Tommy Gunn. Thanks for that question. Keenan says, kettlebell's my favorite. Yeah, I love kettlebells. Really great for your grip strength, right? Blue Man says, he's really a light in the sea of political and cultural division and chaos for me, to be honest. So Blue Man's talking about the YouTuber Infrared, which I don't know. I'm gonna have to check him out. But Blue Man says he's a light in the sea of cultural division and political chaos. So probably worth checking out. I will check him out, actually. Tommy Gunn says, I personally agree with them, but I do believe there's a need for tradition to protect the meaning and the integrity of the church. Great point. Mateo says, C.S. Lewis made that idea with mere Christianity, which is awesome, but agree, it's not that simple. Love your explanation. Thanks so much, Mateo. Tommy Gunn says, the Chesterton community. Yeah, well, maybe the Chesterton community could meet at some point. I don't know who would spearhead that. Maybe I would have to put something together, because I don't really know of any other South African Chestertonian guys who would put that together. But we'll see. Cool, guys. We've got a few minutes left. Let's look at another question I got quite often. Are you seeking God or are you seeking religion? Well, I'm seeking God, obviously, but religion helps me to seek God. The true meaning of religion is religio, binding back, connecting you back to what? Connecting you back to God. So I think people who make this contrast between God and religion, I really think it's a false dichotomy. I think that deepening your religious practices connects you to God. Obviously, you're not supposed to mistake the practices for God himself, but realistically, I think a sincere believer understands that. I think a sincere believer is using the religious practices like prayer to develop that relationship with God. Okay, guys, then a few more points. We're at the final few points here. I'm going to be releasing a weekly newsletter where I'm just going to share a weekly insight. It's going to be called Opening the Chesterton, where I'm opening the chest. I'm breaking down a specific idea of Chesterton. You know, before I make my videos, I often write them out because it helps me kind of formalize my thinking. And each week, I'll be sharing with you a little insight from a piece of Chesterton. Along with that, I'll have another segment called The Book Deli, where I'll break down an interesting idea that I learned from a book I was reading. I did that earlier in this podcast, actually, when I talked about the Terry Pratchett idea of grinding down the universe and sieving it and looking for justice and mercy and love, things like that. And then I'll also give you an update about what's coming up in the next week. Totally free newsletter. I'll be releasing that in a few months, probably, hopefully sooner, but I'm just starting to work on it now. And I'll communicate that with you guys once it's up. Another question I get is, do you speak Afrikaans? So Afrikaans is a local South African language. I'm not going to go into the history of it right now because it's such a long history, but I will just say, ja, ek praat Afrikaans. Afrikaans is tegnies my tweede taal. Ek's meer gemaklik in Engels. Ek verkies eintlik in Engels om in Engels te praat, maar ek kan Afrikaans vloeiend praat en ek's nogal gemaklik daarmee. So I won't go on in more Afrikaans, but basically what I just said is, yes, I do speak Afrikaans and I'm quite fluent in it, but it's technically my second language. I was born in South Africa at a very young age. I moved with my parents. My parents moved. I had to go with them. I was a baby. We moved to America, California, San Diego. I spent about 2 to 3, something like 3 years there. My first language I picked up was American English. We came back to South Africa. My parents traveled the world a little bit. We came back to South Africa, and then I started learning Afrikaans. That's why my accent is a little bit strange, maar ek kan vlos Afrikaans praat, and I can do all of the Afrikaans sound effects like the rrr with my mouth. I can make all of those sounds if I need to. I'm very fluent in Afrikaans, and I am culturally Afrikaans. I have a braai pretty much every Wednesday, which the Afrikaans people will get. Good, then, let's see, upcoming work. Guys, I'm going to be having an interview with a very interesting guy in about a week from now about fitness, about nerd culture, about Lord of the Rings. That's going to be really interesting. His name is Dash Rednar. I found him on Instagram. He's got like 45,000 followers. He does archery. He's built like a machine. Really lean, really interesting guy. He perfectly meets the unity of the kind of nerd and jock archetype. He's like right in the center. Seems like a really interesting guy. I'm excited to talk to him. I'll be releasing that. I'm also speaking with a fellow South African, Conscious Caracal, Ernst van Sale. I'll be speaking with him later this week, and I'll be releasing that. And then I've got a special 23,000 subscriber special where I actually have a podcast with my wife. I'll be releasing that when the channel hits 23,000 subscribers, which is pretty close. I'll share that with you guys. My wife and I speak for about 40 minutes, and we just talk about a few general things. I think you guys might enjoy that. We talk about religion and conversion and everything else. Great, guys. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Let me turn to the chat now and see what you guys are saying. But hopefully that covers pretty much everything. Mateo says, what are your thoughts on AI? So, great question. I must say, I've been utilizing AI a lot. At work, I've been using a program called Gamma to help me with presentations. I've experimented a lot with ChatGPT. I've been using a program called Video AI, who's actually given me a pro membership if I'll just mention them on the channel. So I'm actually doing that now. So video.ai, it will take like let's say you have a full video on YouTube. You can upload it to Video AI, and it will take that full video and it will listen to it like an intelligent person, and it will create clips for you. It will subtitle those clips, and it'll shorten them into shorts. Now, for a guy like me who's got a full-time job, a wife, and a daughter, that saves me a tremendous amount of time, and that's why I'm able to give you guys clips, which are, shorter segments of these long podcasts I'm doing. So, to answer your question, Mateo, first of all, has AI been helpful? Yes. Do I worry about it? Yes. I don't know where AI is going to take us. I think the thing right now that worries me most is the idea that people are going to have AI girlfriends, and that's just going to socially isolate them. If you're a guy listening to this, you can probably imagine what that would be like to have a virtual girlfriend on your beck and call at every moment, who will just tell you everything you want to hear about how amazing you are. And I know some guys who are just going to completely, delve into that. And I don't know how that's going to affect relationships. Have you been talking to your AI girlfriend again? She always tells me I'm so handsome. I can just see problems like that coming down the line. In terms of the bigger problems, like world problems, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to affect the world. I'm naturally an optimistic person. I'm naturally somebody who tends to look on the bright side of things because I just don't think it makes sense not to. I'm hoping that we can incorporate AI and use it in a way that benefits society. But if history is anything to go by, some people are going to use it for good and some people are going to use it for evil. That is just what I think is going to happen. Great question. Boombot says, have you ever been to Cabello? Just read the book Our Lady of Cabello, a great read. No, Boombots, I've not read Our Lady of Cabello, and in fact, I don't even know where Cabello is. I've never even heard that name before. I don't want to lie to you. I'll have to look into it, but thanks for introducing me to it. And that pretty much brings us to the end. Keenan has shared a PayPal link and also a link to my website. So guys, there's a beautiful G.K. Chesterton chart breaking down his book on the book of Job. So Chesterton wrote a really beautiful breakdown of the book of Job, where he explains the meaning of the book of Job. I might do a live stream about that at some point if you're interested. And I made this really detailed chart kind of breaking down the ideas in that introduction, and that's available on my website for $2. So if you want to support the channel, you can download that. It'll give you a high quality printable PDF of this chart that pretty much breaks down Chesterton's thinking. I think it's quite beautiful. I have one for myself. I don't have it here with me, but consider checking that out. If you want to support the channel, $2 might not seem like a lot to you, but I'm in South Africa. We have a different exchange rate. That $2 actually goes a long way, believe me. So if you want to support the channel, please check that out. If you're new here, please subscribe. If you liked this stream, guys, please like this video. It does help. I've been looking at the algorithm and I've been looking at the analytics. It does help when people like the videos. Drop a comment if you enjoyed it. And I think on that note, we are pretty much finished. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this. Newsletter coming up, upcoming podcast coming up, clips coming up, a lot more time being invested in the channel. And thanks to the generous support of viewers like you, I've been able to improve my lighting. I've been able to improve my set, and my computer is going to get an upgrade pretty soon, thanks to the generous support of people like you. So God bless you. You know, in the evenings I say a prayer for my subscribers, so I do pray for you every day, and I appreciate you guys so much for your time and for being here. This has been the Existential Delight podcast. My name is Dylan Gous, and we are pretty much finished on that note. So goodbye for now, and I will see you in the next video.